Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Social. I've got my panel ready to discuss a very interesting article from the Wall Street Journal, as views and other articles around Hodinkee. But before we dive into that, let's do a wristwatch check. Dave, you're in the hot seat. What you wearing?
Oh, so Dave's wearing a miser singer.
Oh, wow! There
Because
you go.
very
I
nice.
actually love these, but this, and Nicholas will appreciate this. This is a special edition of 10. It's the London edition.
Oh,
They
look
made
at that.
10 pieces, and I managed to get number 1 of 10, the old smoke. So they've done a wee London one. I love these because they're fun, they're good. This one is not a jumping hour as much as it looks like it. This one is a date. So Sam, you'll be a happy man. It's got a date. The City Edition with a date, and obviously it's accurate to 5 minutes, broadly speaking, because each little indentation on it. So it's on the hour, 5, 10, quarter past, 20, 25, half past. So it's accurate enough. So don't use it for getting the train. That's what your phone's for. But yeah, it's a cool wee watch. So yeah, I don't wear it often enough, and I dragged this one out just because I thought I've not worn that in a while, and I really do like it on the wrist. So that's what I am wearing.
Excellent. And because we have to mention Christopher Ward in every episode, you've kind of stealthed it in there. Anyway,
hello, Mike.
Christopher Ward talk. Nicholas, what are you wearing?
So I am wearing my Fears Redcliffe date in pewter grey. So I say mine. I mean, I don't actually own this watch. This is one of the very first prototype watches made at the end of last year. But yeah, I'm just hoping no one's ever going to ask me to hand it back. You know, it's yeah. I think so far since mid-October, when I was given this prototype out in New York at Wind Up, bar about a dozen days, I've worn it every single day. And it's just weird because I'm someone who used to always just change my watch all the time. And now I'm just, this is the one watch I wear every single day. And yeah, I love it. It's
Cool.
just great. And even for a prototype, it's pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah. And I should have my review of that exact watch coming out hopefully next couple of days, maybe later today, maybe tomorrow.
Amazing.
Mark, what are you wearing?
I am wearing a Mido Ocean Star GMT.
Very nice.
A brand that doesn't get anything like enough attention.
Right.
If I hadn't been broke, I'd have bought the carbon one that they came out with, but they only made 880 of. But sadly, I'm broke, so that one had to go by. But I wore this yesterday on a 30 Celsius day in Connecticut, and it was perfectly comfortable. It ran like a charm. It got covered in several layers of sunscreen, so it had a pretty rough test yesterday, and it passed with flying colours.
Awesome. Well, I'll round this off. I am wearing my my Bremont, or if Mike Pearson's watching, Bremont. I'm in the process of doing a review of this. I've had it for a couple of months now. I bought it, and I just don't know if I'm going the right angle with the review. I don't know whether I'm being too fair or too harsh. I'm like in the middle of it. But
well, the thing is,
it depends what you're reviewing, though, doesn't it? If you're reviewing the company or you're reviewing the watch, that's two very different things.
That's the thing. Yeah. That is the thing, isn't it? That's the I'm wondering, because I've been doing it over the last couple of months. I'm wondering if I should splice in the review at what I think of the current Bremont models. But then I'm like, well, I'm talking about this one. But it's such an interesting watch because I don't really like Bremont, and there's a lot wrong with it, but I actually like it for that. It's like a.
But I suppose the thing is, Sam, like the big thing is, has your feeling of that watch changed with the rebrand and the new pieces? Does it make you feel more grateful to have that piece and having got it at a time when that symbolized the latest and greatest from Bremont? Or has what's happened made you now look at it and you look at the name on the dial and go, oh, I'm now associating it with something? And I don't know, like it's interesting because that's something I've had to think over 8 years of running Fears. Like when we moved away from quartz £600 watches and started doing £3,000 mechanical, I was like, are people going to feel like, we've abandoned the original price category? Now, fortunately, I don't think that's been the case. I think people viewed it as like, actually, the watch I bought then was a bargain because the brand's gone, more upmarket. But like, it does impact how you feel about it, right? Like, surely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
think for me, I mean, sorry, on you go, Mark.
I say I was wearing my Bramall last week, and it didn't occur to me at all that they'd done anything different because I was looking at the watch I had on my wrist. But if I'd gone to the the interwebs and looked at Bramall, I might have felt different. But as it happens, I like the old Bramall propeller logo, but I'm not gonna sulk. I'm not gonna sulk about them having a new logo. It's, will they make a watch I like? Change happens. And particularly as a Christopher Ward fan, you're used to logo wars. So
yeah, and
question is, Dave,
when you go,
I was going to say, you've got that. I'm assuming we're now going to have a pan to your wardrobe. Do you have any Stone Island?
Absolutely not.
Under
any circumstances. I might have some NATO patches though, but we'll leave it there. But actually, it's weird. I've got a few Bremont. Don't say Bremont. Bremont. I'm Scottish. Say Bremont. It's got a T in the end. Bremont. And I hadn't worn them in, I honestly couldn't tell you how long, but it was a long time. It wasn't weeks. It was months, if not years. And one of my favourite watches aesthetically is the MB, the Martin Baker one. I think it's a cool looking watch. It always has been a cool watch. It looks cool. It's got a nice story to it. There is, okay, there's a bit of marketing contrivedness about it, etc. But there's more based on the truth than a lot of stuff in the watch industry. And it's a cool watch, and it does what it says. And I can remember buying it, and I paid over the odds for it. Like, unfortunately, you do for many watches, not just Bremonts. There's lots of watches that are heavily priced, shall we say. And I actually went and dug it out again because just all the news and the cycle about the brand, I thought, do you know what, I'm going to go and dig that out. I also then remembered I also have the Bremont Boeing edition, which I thought I'll just leave that there because two companies with some challenging press at the moment. I thought I'll just leave that in the dark in the box. That can stay where it is.
Run Rolex,
and all the doors on your house would have fallen off. So
I thought maybe actually I'll not say that because it's not fair. I was going to pick it up and maybe the crown fell off, like the door fell off a Boeing, but that would have been unfair. It actually is much better made than the average Boeing, it has to be said, which is scary because watches don't kill you, planes do. Allegedly, we'll say allegedly because there's an awful lot. There's an awful lot of those Boeing insiders have fallen off bridges and been in strange car accidents.
When I was
a
couple of weeks ago, I was on an Alaska Airways Boeing 737. And when my colleague was booking my ticket, I said to them, I was like, just I wouldn't like a window seat. Just make sure I'm in the aisle. In the aisle, somewhere like not towards the back of the plane, please. Like, yeah, I'm a big
actually, to be fair, Nicholas, if you were beside an actual door, it would have been okay. It was more that I don't want to be beside the door that I don't know actually exists.
Yeah. And what's a shame with that is Alaska's actually one of the good airlines. It's a really good airline over in the US.
I was really impressed with Alaska. Yeah,
it was just unlucky, I think. Just unlucky, but hey ho. So
there you go.
If it's Boeing, I ain't going. Yes,
it's Boeing. I think.
Well, let's before we dive into this, let's just say hello to everyone. So, Rich, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Brassic Time, welcome. Thomas, thanks for joining us. Shame you couldn't join the show. I know you were busy. Rick on Watches, hello. Bill K, it's nice to see Nicholas back. Yes, it is very nice to see Nicholas back.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
And then Kevin, thanks for joining us. Kevin being first in the door there. Sean and Junior, thank you for being a channel member as well, Junior. Right, okay. Well, what we thought we would do is talk about a recent Wall Street Journal article. I'm not going to go too much. We've got some quotes from the article, but it's actually behind a paywall, so you can't actually read it. So a lot of us have read it, and we'll talk through a lot of the points, but I just can't show it here because it's behind a paywall. So, but the gist of the article was that I guess the gist of the article was that Hodinkee when its original inception was, this a magazine, and it grew from there. And actually, it grew to like 25 million a year. They were doing from their insurance, and then the watch drops and stuff like that. And then they got this investment, which allowed them to buy Crown and Caliber, which I didn't realize the investment they'd got from LVMH. Well, some of it from LVMH, and also Tom Brady had invested as well, which is when he wasn't invested in crypto.com, not crypto.com, FTX. So I mean, not that he might go down as maybe not the best investor in the world, but and then it basically is discussing all of the kind of missteps that led to its current state, or guess we would say current image problem, I suppose, because it doesn't seem to be quite have the prestige it had previously. So well, let's go to the panel. What did maybe I'll start with you, Dave. What did you think of the article when you read it?
Okay, so I personally found the article quite, considering Wall Street Journal is a pretty prestigious broadsheet financial reporting newspaper. Like a lot of these newspapers, like a lot of print media, to be honest, let's not beat about the bush. A lot of them are under pressure because print media is under pressure from the internet, from blogs, from everything else, and they've diversified a little bit. And this is definitely not quite as hard-hitting and punchy an article I would have expected to read. It's not really an article so much about the business of it. There's a lot of hearsay. There's a lot of he said, she said, this disgruntled X person said this, they said that. And actually, to be honest, it's reporting on something that's absolutely not exclusive to Hodinkee. The watch market, the luxury market, is under pressure. Cost of living, inflation, all of the other things that affect pretty much all of the Western economies at this point in time are having a material impact on what people have got to spend. Therefore, sales have gone down. Any watch brand, they'll lie to you. They'll quite happily lie and tell you things are amazing. But it isn't. It's a fact. Everyone's got reduced sales. They're still making plenty of money, but they're selling a lot less than they were in the heyday of 2-3 years ago for multiple reasons. The main one being the general state of the economy. And they seem to have kind of picked on Hodinkee. But I guess they were a bit of the poster child. They were the kind of, look at us, we're great. They were the one that lots of watch enthusiasts talked about, cited, referenced. And they're kind of the easy picking target for it. So I think they've given Hodinkee a hard time when actually they could have done a much better, broader article about the state of the industry, but they choose to pin it on Hodinkee. That's my take on it.
I have to say, I tend to agree with you quite largely. I mean, if I tend to read any news at all, it will be Financial Times, and the FT would have done just a massive piece about the luxury industry, and Hodinkee would have been up to 3 paragraphs of it. Now, the thing is, as someone who has, left a job and, founded and owns my own company, I understand, the incredible pressure Ben Kleiman must be under. As an individual, I've met him several times. He won't remember me in the slightest, but that's beside the point. But I feel sorry for the guy, right? 16 years of hard work and no investment, no balance sheet will ever show the amount of emotional stress, the amount of sacrifice to get it and build it. But I was reading just before we jumped on the LinkedIn post he put up about it. And it was just the way he talks about the fact that, Hodinkee changed the watch market, changed the watch industry. And it's that thing of going, yeah, we know Hodinkee, helped make watches cool rather than being just, weird, geeky, conversation pieces. But you kind of read that and you're like, oh, come on, no wonder they took a shot just at you. You got both barrels. It's kind of like if you're going to push the narrative, Hodinkee changed the watch industry and it changed the market and it changed all of this, you're gonna get shot at, right?
I think you're right, Nicholas. There's definitely there's a hint of God complex going on there of, if it wasn't for Hodinkee, what state would the industry be in? Frankly, it would be absolutely fine. Thank you very much. It would, some other website. There's plenty of other good sites out there. Someone else would have done it. I think there's also a big bit, which is maybe a different topic we'll come on to, is I think they got greedy. I think Hodinkee as a business got greedy, but that's maybe a different one. We'll maybe come on to that once Mark's had his say on the article.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought the article was a little light, a little simplistic. And, as everyone has said, it didn't cover the industry as a whole, the pre-owned market as a whole. But then Hodinkee, to go back to the LinkedIn part, it started off like a lot of the popular websites did, as a blog about watches because I like watches. So a blog to watch, Worn and Wound, Hodinkee, Fratello, and you could go on and on and on about watch enthusiasts who found an audience, and Hodinkee were, I think, the first and initially the most successful at becoming a business on the basis of that enthusiasm. Then I think they seem to find a direction that they turn themselves into the GQ of watches, the lifestyle part of it. But in terms of the article, I think the timelines were right, but I don't think they certainly took a shot at Hodinkee, maybe because someone didn't have a good customer service experience with them. It's hard to know, but it could have been much better and much broader by just saying, hey, it's not just Hodinkee.
Yeah, but it was also, sorry, I was going to say, it's low hanging fruit as well.
Yeah.
They're, the Wall Street Journal are part of a bigger entity. For them to attack, say, some of the big brands, they're playing with fire when they do that, because a lot of these big brands are part of bigger conglomerates and advertising spend, etc., etc. Hodinkee, at the end of the day, they're a competitor ultimately to them. They're a other media outlet, or certainly predominantly were a media outlet, who have a retail arm. It's easy to take shots at the low-hanging fruit.
And
one thing I was just going to... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I presume from its name, the Wall Street Journal still has a lot of people in New York, and this feels like we don't have a lot of news, but this is another New York company that we can talk about. Hard to say. I'm not familiar enough with the journalist involved.
I think it was. There was. I sort of agree with what you say. Maybe they should have covered, but I think they covered enough of what was going on in the general watch scene. I mean, he talked about, how Daytona prices have gone down, but he specifically cited things that Hodinkee had done. And to be fair, the best part of, over 90 people lost their, was it 70 or 80 people lost their jobs over the last 3 years working for Hodinkee. So it's not just like it's not hitting Ben in the, it's obviously hitting Ben's pride, but it's also actually it impacted real people who were working there. I thought it had some quite interesting points in there about not just the decline of the watch market affecting them, but that they'd actually made some quite serious missteps in the way that they'd invested their money. Apparently they were overspending massively, and there's just a throwaway comment about overspending, which I think it needed some stats behind it, and it said a lot of projects had failed to launch, which again was kind of just a general statement. I think we need some, but the one that I thought was interesting was where they were spending $80,000 a month on that retail location in New York. And I actually went there thinking it was their offices. So, I mean, that's since 2019. So that's like a significant a chunk of change, isn't it? And they're still hoping to sublet that. They still pay 80,000, and that was a retail location that they never opened. So
what I will say though is, because they certainly overstretched. They were greedy, but so. Just to give you a little insight into my domestic life, one of the things my husband ensures is whenever there is a documentary, a Netflix series, or a film about some startup growing and blowing up, like Theranos, WeWork, all of them, he ensures we sit down and watch it, because he's always like, there's two problems with you entrepreneurs. When everything is going well, you think you're God and will take over the world, and you never ever see the downside.
Yep.
And also, I remember reading an article about Adam Newman, because I'm someone who I have a degree in economics. I'm very interested in business, but also in the economy and things that change, in the economy. So, in the 2010s, I was reading all the Fortune articles and Forbes articles about Elizabeth Holmes, Adam Newman, and all this, but particularly about male entrepreneurs in their 30s. And I feel worried because I tick those boxes. You tell him he's God, he's going to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, 16 years is a hell of a long time to run a business. He started that when the financial world was blowing up. What his job was. He was an analyst at UBS.
Yeah,
this is Ben Clymer I'm talking about, right? So, and then, he was one of the early ones to get going, and then it started going well, and he was slicker. He was better at packaging it up. He realized that he could make Hodinkee like Apple. Welcome to our world where bad things don't happen. It's a beautiful place. Listen to our podcast, watch our videos, enjoy our magazine, and buy our pocket squares and watches online, right? I subscribed to it. I thought it was a beautiful world, especially when everything else outside there is horrible. It's kind of difficult to think how they wouldn't have gone that way, especially within the investment. Like, the investors at the end of the day do not really care about whether Hodinkee does well. It's a bet. Like, what do they invest? 40 something million? Let's be frank. Maybe not to Tom Brady. I don't know his personal finances, but certainly to LVMH, to the investment group which LVMH were running. I mean, literally, that's double what the Arnault family's yacht costs to run per year. That's 20 million a year just to run their yacht, right? So 40 million. I'm not saying they can afford to, they'll ignore losing it. But like, this was one bet across loads of other things, and it didn't pay off. But yeah. I think it was shocking reading that article, especially as someone who runs a business, when you're like $80,000 a month. I'm thinking, here I am renting 2 premises for my business and kind of going, oh my goodness, our overheads are so big. I was just like, oh my goodness, no, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, if you look at Hodinkee, a lot of what you said there, Nicholas, is bang on. When you've got, especially males of a certain age, when they're successful, if they've got the mindset, and don't get me wrong, you have to have that mindset to get to where Ben Clymer's got to. If you go in lily-livered, you'll fail before you even start. So you have to have that arrogance, you have to have that kind of bloody-mindedness, and you have to, when people say, you're amazing, you have to go, I am amazing, and I'm going to be even more amazing. Sadly, that's the way it works. But the more I look at Hodinkee, the more I think there was definitely a bit of opportunism. They kind of looked at it and went, oh, watches, that's on the up. That's dealing with a rarefied air of people who've got money to spend. They tried to democratize it a little bit. They threw money at it. But if you look, they probably should have moved earlier on every stage they did, but didn't. They waited until it was almost a sure bet for them that they couldn't lose, and they threw at it. But the problem was they then got the old horse blinkers on. Every time they did something and it succeeded, they thought, we can't fail. And sure enough, the minute you start thinking it's not going to fail is the minute that you walk off the cliff in the fog. And that's, in many respects, what they have done. Whether they can save it, I hope they can. It's horrible to see any business fail. But if you also look at the Crown and Caliber side of it, where they bought the pre-owned business, it actually is still running. Yes, they've got rid of a lot of people. And yes, sadly, there's always a human cost to these things, but it's still running. There's a lot of other big-named pre-owned marketplaces that are now dead because of what's happened in the marketplace. The fact that they've actually taken that rather inhumane but drastic business decision, which is businesses don't care about people, they care about their own survival. And if they have to get rid of people, they do. Too many businesses, especially in Europe, hang on to people and end up failing because they didn't do what they have to do. I'm not saying that, that's not terrible for the people involved. It is, but they do look like they're trying to make some pretty aggressive moves to try and keep themselves alive.
Yeah. I like the comment I saw from Richard Bentz. I thought that was very, very apt, actually, because there is that moment of going. So I'm sure Sam will throw it up. It is one of those things where you go like, you don't know there's the peak until after the peak, right? Like everyone wishes they could have sold crypto on the 3rd of April, like, you know, and then the next day it all comes crashing down, right? But like with that, I think there was a moment where like, yeah, that desk clock, for anyone who doesn't remember the desk clock from Hodinkee.
Yeah, Rich has got it here. Rich, this
Yeah.
is. I totally agree that this is the moment. This is the
Definitely.
start of the downfall.
That's when delusion
that-
fully set in. That's when the delusion fully set in.
Yeah.
We can pull this,
Yeah.
let's be honest, piece of junk out of skip and throw it at people, and people will pay anything for it.
It crossed the
And
line. Yeah,
That's where
Didn't
it's
they all
where
sell?
it's oh, that's right, they did. They sold out, didn't they? They sold out. That magical
careful on that one.
website update. I can just imagine the web developer being screamed at. Hit the button, just sell them out.
Well, I mean, but you know that probably just before that was the when was it the current Submariner came out? Because I remember reading Stephen Pulverant's article about that, and he was so gushing about how significant and major this release was. And I remember thinking at the time, like that article about that watch was like absolute. It was made for Hodinkee, right? Like it was so peak Hodinkee. And then I think the desk clock or the travel clock came shortly after that, while we were all in lockdown and we couldn't travel. So that felt friendly enough. Yeah, it's very interesting to see that. But I mean, you read the article, you read Ben Clymer's comment on LinkedIn, like the fact that he's now visible and back. I mean, yes, they took on all that investment, but they also spent a lot of money to buy Crown and Calibre. I don't know whether anyone's able to find out the information, but it'd be interesting to know how much of that cash he actually got himself, because investment can just dilute the shares rather than going into the founder's pocket. And I think people forget that. They see then the number and think, oh, he's got like 40 something million now swishing
Yeah,
around
he
in
spent
his,
And-
I don't
and
think
it's-
so. I think most of that money went to the company. You
yeah,
know, it wants the company to be spent.
I agree.
So,
I'm sure
Absolutely.
I'm sure Ben, in relative terms to the average person, did very nicely. Thank you very much. But by no means do I think he pocketed a huge chunk of change out of it. Because if he had, to be brutally honest, if you're that nature of that type of individual and you were at this stage and you had enough out of it, you would just slowly be sauntering into the sunset as the boat dipped under the waves, you know, and he's back because I think he wants to save it.
Well, he's
Says he's
got
or
a big enough share,
or he's
of
got
it.
money, yeah, or he's got money, or he's got liabilities tied up enough in it that he's got a vested interest in making sure it doesn't sink, because no one ultimately knows the whole story. But there's enough in it for me to say that he's not sitting about with a big box full of money somewhere, and he's probably got tie-ins to it that people are unaware of that makes sure he wants to try and save it.
Yeah, it's not pride
I've-
bringing him back.
I've known a couple of people who've been part of these sort of venture capital, in inverted commas, acquisitions. And you may not lose your house, but you'll lose everything else just as part of the deal. So,
And also,
a friend of mine,
let's not forget,
friend
Mark,
of
the
mine
one
was
thing you lose.
well, you lose an awful lot of reputation. But you know, a friend of mine became a CEO on part of a venture capital deal, and he's going, it was scary. I didn't, I got a decent pay rise and I got some money out of it, but the conditions attached to that were truly scary. You have to perform, and if you don't perform, you will cut until you do. Yeah. Which is what seems that Hodinkee have done.
Because I think the other big thing is ego. You know, I think there's a lot of egos swirling around in the pot in this business and in this world. You know, the watch world is full of egos, and we all have egos. Like everyone in the comments, all of us here, we've all got egos to some extent. The difference is how aware you are of your ego and how much you're able to check it. But there's definitely some people involved in this that are troubled to check their egos, I think.
Yeah. So let's just go through a couple. So Watch Pappy says, I think they lost a bit of credibility as well when they bought Crown and Calibre. Now, there is an interesting part in the article that says, just let me read it out. I've got a quote from it here, which I thought was pretty good. The writer says, Crown and Calibre customers were often horological novices who wanted a nice watch to mark a life milestone. The Hodinkee reader was a watch enthusiast who might already have a safe full of rare Patek Philippe's and wasn't necessarily in the market for a used Rolex. The idealized scenario in which Hodinkee readers crept over to Crown and Caliber's pre-owned offerings just didn't seem to be happening, said former employees. What do we think on that? Because that's quite a bold statement there, isn't it?
I think
I disagree.
that's naive in the writer's side. I think one thing we all have to do here is the pre-owned market, the pre-owned watch market. So whether we're talking Crown and Caliber, whether we're talking Watchfinder, Watchbox, any of those, for the last 5+ years, a vast majority of their business is predicated around one thing and one thing only: Rolex. That's it. It's not predicated around anything else. It's all around Rolex being that sign of consumerism, wealth, success, everything that's seen across top to bottom, whether you're a mega watch person or you're just a Joe Boggs in the street. And suddenly people wanted a Rolex for whatever reason, and the prices were doing this. And that was a massive, it was like the housing bubble. It was like any bubble. There was a massive bubble, all predicated around Rolex. You know, let's ignore the FP Journes and let's ignore all of that stuff, because honestly, that's the 0.1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the actual pre-owned watch market. That's like talking about people that collect bloody Picassos. It's so small and it's so little people are actually involved in it. But everyone from Joe Bloggs that got a promotion at work that wanted a sports stainless steel Rolex, tried to buy one on the high street, got laughed out every shop that he went into, and thought, okay, Google's my friend, where can I buy one? Oh, look, these are these dudes, they've got some. Okay, I need to pay over the odds. Screw it, I want it, I'll buy it. That was all it was. And everyone bought into it. Everyone bought into it, you know, because like the housing boom, like any boom, stock market booms, nothing ever goes down until it does.
Yeah. There's some interest. We've had some interesting. I'll just go to Watch Pappy again because he's talking about the travel clock. The travel clock became the meme that poked fun at how Hodinkee had become a bunch of out the touch rich. And I think that was it, because I think Hodinkee was like, they went very well down this aspirational element, that this aspirational brand, because the other watch publications, they were good, but they were all, you know, they were sort of on a line of, oh, this is a bit geeky. If you're really into watches, this is all like minutia. But Hodinkee was an aspirational band, like, oh, this is the type of collector you could be. And I think, and they would do drops where they dropped like an Oris, which I think was the most expensive one they dropped, but that was only like $1,200 or something. So you could still afford it if you were like a newer watch collector. Or they drop a G-Shock and you're like, oh, I've got a Hodinkee swatch. I've got something with Hodinkee on it. But the travel clock was like, oh, they do take us for a bunch of mugs. Actually, they do think that they can, and they even apologize afterwards.
It was entirely tone deaf.
Yeah.
But the travel clock made it, if you hadn't spotted that was what Hodinkee were doing, the travel clock made it so bleeding obvious you couldn't avoid it.
Yeah. If you didn't read it in the articles that you literally were reading, it came along and slapped you in the face and kicked you up the backside to tell you, you know, you're missing the point here. We're just literally taking the piss, and that's what it felt like.
Yeah, that's really what it, because and for what they must, I think they only had a handful, didn't they? And they sold them for $5, but for what they must have made on those versus the reputational damage from that, I mean, talk about loss. We've got another comment here. I'm going to murder this. Is it Malika Crawford? Malika was an odd addition to Hodinkee, and she helped fuel readers moving away from reading regularly, stick to watches, not fashion. I don't know.
Well, you see, I know where you're coming from that, because Hodinkee was, you know, and a lot of people who are properly, you know, watch geeks into their watches always kind of viewed Hodinkee as this was their private little kind of like space. This was their little bit of the internet where it was all geeky watch talk, written really nicely, to be fair, some amazingly well written articles by some really talented writers and staffers, and it was their thing. But like a lot of businesses, people completely and utterly overestimate how big the predominantly Swiss watch industry is. In global terms, it is like having a pea in the ocean. It's tiny. Yes, it's a few billion, but it's tiny. You know, it's like Apple. Apple have like engineering departments that would eat up the entire Swatch industry and spit it out because it's that small in real global terms. And when you're someone like Hodinkee and you're growing, they forget one thing. It's not that big an industry. You get to a certain size, and that's as big as you get. So they have to try and diversify. You can see it with Worn and Wound. They're kind of moving into the whole everyday carry, pocket knives, fidget spinners, bags. And that's probably arguably more connected, possibly, to watches than maybe getting into couture fashion and that kind of area. But then there's plenty of the high fashion magazines like whatever, you know, GQ, Marie Claire, you know, all the big shiny glossy magazines. They all cover watches. So no one comments about that. No one says, oh, you stay in your lane, just keep covering fashion. What you're talking about watches for? Watches are intrinsically, for most people, a fashion statement. It's just that when you're into watches, you think watches are more important than everything else, and it's not fashion. Ultimately, for the vast majority of people who buy watches, it's a fashion item.
I tell you what, like, you know, as someone who spends nearly an hour every day reading watch reviews, I actually quite like her pieces because it's a different voice, it's a different take on something. And I think with Hodinkee, it was an interesting take on them because it was like, oh, we're big enough that we can now afford to have someone on payroll who's giving that different view. Like for most people, it'd be like, we can't justify that because we need someone who's like the expert in this, the expert in this. Da, da, da. It was kind of interesting to see that. But I mean, she's still writing with them. She has a YouTube series now with Hodinkee and stuff. So she's survived, and there's they clearly see a lot of value in that.
Yeah. I mean, if I'll need to word this carefully. I know a few people who have worked for Hodinkee on various capacities over the years, and speaking to some of them who might have been more the original set, let's just say they were being paid eye-wateringly well, which was also part of the reason why they got amazingly good people who consistently stayed there and wrote articles for them. You know, press writing for the watch trades and the watch journals and the watch publications is not a particularly well-paid trade. It looks fancy and fashionable because you're getting flown around the world and going to events and drinking champagne, but actually that's the benefit. It's not the amount of money in your pocket, and that's why many of them write for many different journals and many different kind of places to try and get enough money. And Hodinkee were paying monstrously, and to the point where they were being offered very, very good jobs in other industries, and they were knocking it back because of how well they were been paid at Hodinkee. That's all come to an end because when they started reining it back in, that's when an awful lot of them left because suddenly they were offered other things and they thought, actually, yes, I'll move for more money. So, you know, I think the business lost sight very early on of, hang on a minute, we are so far above everybody else. They thought it was never ending. They thought that they had this kind of like golden handshake complex where they just thought that this would carry on forever. And I'm not saying it's a badly run business. I don't know enough about the background of the business, but from a few things that I've heard or seen, and yes, they're anecdotally, but they're from people that were directly involved and I trust enough that what they're telling me is true. I think they could probably have made some better decisions a long time ago that might have steadied the ship more now.
Sam, can I just ask a question of the four of us? Because one thing I think we all take for granted is Hodinkee, like watch brands. It will be here tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. That's not the case, right? These are businesses. They have investors. Investors pull the plug. You know, we know of watch brands that have gone under not only in the last, few years, but the last 5 years, 10 years. You know, the stories you hear whenever you go to Switzerland. Certainly the moment you pop out to the smoking area, my goodness, the gossip starts flying of which brand is about to be cut. And this is real, right? And so here's a question. Do you guys think it can actually be saved and get back to a place of credibility in the minds of enthusiasts?
God, that's a good question. You
No.
go on, Dave. You're not convinced.
I think if they think they can go back to what they were at the start, that's done and dusted. I think that's done and dusted. For me, what they can potentially do is if they can find a niche that's something they can fit into, they can effectively scale down to that size and have some form of continuance. Good. But also, the sad thing with businesses is, yes, 16 years is a long time, probably longer than they thought it would survive when they started it, to be brutally honest with you. Most businesses fail in the first 2-3 years. Media outlets constantly change. We only need to look at magazines, print magazines. Even when print was good, the title would change every few years. They would have a refresh. They would change their narrative. But I think sometimes you have to just look at the cold light of day. You have to sit back and go, okay, we've done 16 years. Have we done everything we can do? And is it better now that we just have a managed wind down and we all go and do something different, or we start something afresh? That's my personal gut. I think there's an awful lot of burnt bridges, damaged kind of perceptions of what it is. They're certainly never going to play again to the audience they originally played to. If they can find a niche in the mass main market, maybe, but I don't think they'll ever get back there.
Yeah, I'm trying. Somebody, Boston Watch Collector. This is we can't verify this, but he's speculating that Ben got 60 million and they offered him more equity to come back. But maybe I'm reading the article wrong. But the article did say that they got 40 million. Was it 40 million invested, which wouldn't buy the company, because at that time they were turning over like 100 million a year, it was saying. And also that's not enough money to buy Crown and Caliber, because Crown and Caliber were turning over 53.
I thought they were turning over 25 and the investment valued them at 100 million.
Yeah.
So if they were buying
which is more reasonable, in terms of
they did turn out of the subsequent year. It said that the subsequent year, maybe it was last year, it said revenue at the companies declined to around 70 million from last year of around 100 million.
Ah, right.
So they were making.
My bad. Okay.
You're right. You're right. I said it wrong. They did, when they got that investment, it valued at 100 million, but they were actually turning over quite a bit of money. But we don't.
But
know
is that with the Crown and Caliber?
Yes, together.
That was the weird thing I thought from the article, which didn't make sense, was it sounded like the turnover from Crown and Caliber was higher than the amount they bought it for.
That's what
it was.
Right. Which, any basic business, and I know we're talking in pre-owned, you're talking about a sliver of a margin. You're not talking about a massive, great big margin, but the basic math of buying a business is 4x.
Yeah, I was
revenue.
going to say 3x, but yeah, 4x.
And I remember, either they misprinted something, but I doubt. Well, I assume they wouldn't have, or it would have got corrected. I'd love to understand the economics on that. Or
they go in talking a lot about the fact that a lot of the folk at Crown and Caliber were pretty disillusioned by the fact that they were owned by a smaller company. A smaller company bought them out,
right.
And that Hodinkee had this kind of golden halo around them that they could march around the place thinking we are amazing, and they were just seen as kind of like the guys that sell pre-owned watches. And that, I think, had a lot of built-in resentment within the greater business, because there was also a comment made about, and they kind of it did sound like a bit of a set-up job, but they asked them, did you have a plan to incorporate Crown and Caliber into Hodinkee? And the answer was, oh, no, we were going to keep them running separately. And then they managed to pull out a presentation that had happened at a boardroom, and where that's exactly what they'd said they were going to do with it. Yeah. So there was a lot of backpedaling at that point. But, I don't know. It's a messy position that they're in now as well. And I think the other thing, remember, to go from 25 as a media company, that's what they were before this. Let's be honest, they were a media company who did some collab anniversary limited edition watches. They did that. Advertising, bit of insurance, 25 million. Pretty tidy, actually. And I guarantee you that their margins and profit will be, hopefully pretty juicy in that, because, they won't have a huge overhead, depending, of course, if what they paid their staff was true. But to go to 100 million when you start into retail is not that difficult, because they're not exactly selling cheap items. They were selling, a wide range of brands of watches at high ticket price, and had a lot of kind of publicity doing it as well. So it wouldn't have been that difficult for them to go to 100 million. But that's still pretty poor. It's not a huge amount of money as a watch retailer, a global watch retailer at that. Remember.
Yeah, but to return to Nicholas's question, I think Hodinkee have moved too far away from their original audience, which is the sort of the literate geek. They've moved a long way from that. They don't have the staff to give them that credibility anymore. The hope would be, can they cut enough to return to profitability, or at least break even, and retain the new audience they have? I think there was a reference in the article that they've lost about half of the watch brands that they used to distribute for. So they used to have 30, now they have 15. So you've got to find some way of replacing that revenue. You've got to stem the losses at Crown and Caliber, which I'm guessing they have done, although that was a brutal process. But can they get to the point where they're growing again, or are they just going to tick over and die? That's going to be a tough one. I suspect
there's no way for them to regain the turnover that they've lost by losing 15 watch brands. Not possible.
Exactly, yeah.
And most of their watch brand relationships were actually atypical. In most retail spheres, the brand is the boss. The brand is the one who will say yay or nay to whether you get that brand in your store or in your location. They will hit you with a ream of different challenges, whether it's brand alignments, whether it's what you're being told. You will buy X, Y, and Z if you want this, and if you don't buy this, you don't have us anymore. Hodinkee had got themselves into this mystical place where they could go to brands like Omega and say, we want to have Omega, but we're only going to cherry pick the lines that we want to sell. We don't want all that other stuff that we know we're not interested in. And they got it. Most of these brands gave them what they wanted, because Hodinkee at that point was seen as like this unicorn. It was this amazing place that they could talk directly to the enthusiast that maybe they as brands themselves were struggling to do in their own rights. And that's all fine and well until Hodinkee were no longer the darling. And when they're now not the darling, the brands are like, what benefit do you now bring to us when all we are doing is giving you these cherry-picked premium items? And I've just taken them back. And quite rightly, the brands have turned around and said, you no longer bring value to what you were doing before, so we're out. That's big turnover, because you don't need to sell hundreds of watches at 10, 25, 30, 40,000 each before you get into some pretty big numbers in terms of turnover. What are they going to replace it with? G-Shocks? They better get used to selling a lot of G-Shocks, like a lot of G-Shocks, if they want to find that money back. And
well,
it'll only be...
They made limited, didn't they? The John Mayer one, that grey John Mayer one, I bet they could have sold, multiples of those, but beyond what they limited them to. But one of the interesting things as well, and the article points out, is it says, to boost sales, Hodinkee started to clear out inventory by increasing the volume of promotions. This is at Crown and Caliber.
Oh my goodness!
Point. It said Claimer and Fowler dispute that. But they can't dispute it because we've all got those emails where it was like 1,000.
Like every other day.
Yeah.
Every other day. It's like visiting some like dodgy website that you've seen like on a sponsored Instagram post, and then it just follows you for the rest of your life, spamming you with emails every other day.
Yeah.
It's just, that's one of those moments in the article where I was like, you know what? I'm an optimist, right? I want businesses to succeed. I want people to be happy and succeed, right? Like that's my big failing in life. But I was reading that and just be like, you literally can't say that. Like I've got a junk folder full of these emails and I'm still getting them. Like another $500 here, $1,000 here. And I'm just like, it gets to the point where like we always laughed about Amiga and their limited editions, and they don't do that. And, that's moved on. It's now become like the joke of Hodinkee and this, the $1,000 off a watch. It's just like completely like, I read that, Sam, and was just like, that's just not correct. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we could talk about. I mean, we're talking about Ben having a big ego. I'm going to massage mine for a second because I made a video about the Ed Sheeran G-Shock, and a couple of people called me out in the comments saying, "Oh well," because my speculated that either they'd ordered too many of them, thinking that they were going to be this ginormous thing. But there is a thing in the article that says a launch last year of G-Shock reference 6900 with the British singer Ed Sheeran languished in the warehouses, according to former employees. Several former employees said that the company began to mark limited edition watches as sold out, even if the stock was still available. And I called that out in my video because they did show occasionally on Hodinkee's website, oh, this is sold out. I think to try and get people to, when the Ben limited edition came out, if you looked on the website and clicked on the Ed Sheeran one, it said sold out. So I think people are like, oh, this Ben one's going to sell out as well. I bet you they've got a warehouse full of the Ben limited edition ones, because that was a massaging of his ego beyond probably on par with the travel clock, I would say. But I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah. I mean, someone who's at SoCal Watch Reviews saying he hopes the same doesn't happen to Worn and Wound. I think they're very different businesses, to be honest with you. Worn and Wound is a significantly smaller business, no two ways about it. And that's not a bad thing. There's plenty of very good small businesses, but they're definitely very much about staying within a sphere that they feel is directly related to where they started, and their shows they're doing, obviously they've got San Fran, Chicago, and they've got New York, which are super successful, and they only seem to be getting better. Along with
you and
Nicholas,
I were both in San
we were both
Francisco.
at San Fran,
incredible.
and great audience, and the audience loved it, because I never, the cynic in me being Scots is like, never trust a company telling you that their show was amazing. Ask the people there. And when you talk to the people there, what did you think? Are you enjoying it? Is it good? By far and away, people were like, yeah, really good fun, really enjoyed it. And that's a good sign. I know that they've got plans afoot to expand that show dynamic. Obviously, they're only continental USA at the moment. If they rolled that into, let's say, Europe or the UK or other markets, they would clean up, because there's nothing like that actually anywhere else. I think the nearest I've seen anywhere like it is there's two shows. The British Watchmakers, which for the first time had that show this year. Very similar format. There's no doubt there was a degree of influence probably taken from that, and quite rightly, because it works. But also that show is quite specific. It's about British watch brands. You could quite easily have a Worn and Wound alongside that, and it would not interfere with each other. And one I think it's called Spring Sprang Sprung, which is a similar show that happens in Singapore each year, which is micro brands, smaller brands, and it's a kind of same kind of idea, kind of table format setup. It works really well. And I think those guys have diversified into areas that are roughly related. Bags, pocket knives, everyday carry, all of these things. I think most folk are into watches, collect weird little objects. Like a watch is a weird little object. They collect other things. I know I do. I think you do as well, Sam. I know Ricky does. Plenty of people I know into watches collect other stuff like that. So I think they're on a more right path, certainly, than Hodinkee. Hodinkee wants to make big money.
For Worn and Wound, I remember they, when they started to show more expensive watches, it was like they were apologizing for stepping outside their less than $1,000 lane. They were almost embarrassed about it, but what they said was, we need to do it to survive. And I think I think the Zacks have got their heads on where hopefully they're not making a loss on the events. They've got other, that strand to their business should be profitable for them. I would be horrified if it wasn't.
And
there is something. Sorry, go on, Dave.
I was going to say, maybe Nicholas can relate to this as well. I'll not reveal too much about it, but they did the right thing. They actually sent out a bit of a, you exhibited at this show. Here's a survey. Can you fill it in? It wouldn't be fair of me to say what they were asking, but let me put it this way. They were asking questions that, as someone that's been in business a long time, looked at it and said, they are actively looking to see where there are other revenue avenues applicable to them that they can work through. Fair play to them, you know. It's like, if you don't ask, you don't get. And there were definitely questions in that were loaded to try and get information that might allow them to monetize other aspects of how the show runs. And I think that's actually a really good thing. Not enough businesses basically ask those questions. Hey, we need to make this work for you and for us. How can you help us make some more money? And I think actually it was quite refreshing to see it.
Yeah.
One thing that would be interesting, I mean, you know, if Hodinkee hypothetically was to fail, it would cause shockwaves. It's the big one, right? You know, it's one thing if a small independent watch brand goes out of business, but if it's a household name, it affects people's confidence in what's going on. But the other thing, I mean, I don't want to say there's silver linings to, you know, people having lost their jobs at Hodinkee. There's not that at all. But if you want to take a positive away from it, if you're the other businesses, you're the Warner Wound, the Fratellos, the Monochromes, you know, if you're, you know, Time and Tides, if you're these businesses, you're going to be watching this very carefully to make sure you do not make the same mistakes. Because we go back to like 2018-19, there was a real feeling that podcasts and websites, everyone was looking at Hodinkee going, I want a bit of that. I want to do a bit of that. And it just felt like there was a kind of slow steering of people going into one direction. Now, people will deny it now, but at the time, you know, I'm pretty certain people were looking at Hodinkee going, wow, they've cracked the magic code. Why don't we do that? And I think it's probably no bad thing from an enthusiast standpoint, because it means people will actually go, oh my goodness, it didn't work. And I mean, the Wall Street Journal headline, it was sensational, but it kind of, you know, it hit the nail on the head of saying, no, actually, if you're, you know, running a media company or a podcast or a YouTube channel or a watch brand, you better remember to like do what you do best and don't try and copy, because actually who you're copying may not have the hands on the wheel quite in the way you think they do.
Yeah.
And I actually think, and this might be slightly confrontational, but it also, I think, shows a very marked difference in how business operates in North America, specifically the USA and Europe, which is hire and fire and all of these things. You know, businesses are the absolute king in the US market. And like, if there's too many people get gone. Simple as that. You only need to look at Elon Musk. You need to look at, you know, Amazon. You need to look at Google, Apple, any of them. When something's dead, the people that, you know, if that project's dead, the people are gone. End of story. Europe is a much more pro-employee environment. And you actually have to think things through, because it's not that easy to get rid of people. So if you're going to do something, unlike the Americans they can move so fast in America compared to Europe, because they've got that advantage in business that you can pull people in and you can shove people out as and when you need to. You just can't do that in Europe. And to be fair, in many other areas of the world, because you just can't. Legally, you can't do it, which does mean that brands like Fratello have probably had to take much more considered decisions about, do we do this or do we not? Because if this doesn't work, we have a big problem. And employees will take a business down in Europe, whereas in the US, it's usually the money that brings the business down.
Yeah, I mean, so Orange Hand did say that Fratello did a much better job staying true to its core audience. Hodinkee sold out literally and figuratively.
And can I say something non-controversial?
Yeah.
Please upvote, folks.
Oh yeah, yeah. And thanks, Bob, for the $5.
That's controversial. I'm like the Roman Emperor. Off with his head. Off with his head.
We've actually got our most concurrent viewers that we've ever had at the moment. So so thank you everyone that's tuned in. A lot of new faces as well in the comments. So I think Nicholas, you might have brought some new audience with you. Much appreciated. Well, let's just go through. Yeah, so a lot of people citing Fratello, and then let's just say, So Brian, welcome, Brian. He said that a third-party fulfilled. He bought an Ed Sheeran G-Shock, and he said that they were slow and made mistakes on my order for Ed Sheeran edition. I've bought a couple of watches off Hodinkee, and their actual fulfillment. Unfortunately, Brian had an issue, but I've bought two off them, and I've returned one as well, and that bit seemed okay. But obviously, there's a third party company running all that bit. Then those were G-Shocks.
I think it's always been that way with them. I mean, and to be fair, actually, just in many distribution businesses, that is becoming, drop shipment or third party warehousing is because that's just becoming the de facto way, because businesses pull the cost not doing that. There's many specialist businesses doing it. The problem when you use that model is, to a degree, you can live and die by how good that handling company are at doing their job. And there are some amazing companies at doing it. I've had to deal with some, and they're very good. There's some awful ones as well.
And the very good ones are very expensive too.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, as someone who has spent years packing up watches and now has a team dedicated to doing it, and I mean, we on our B2B side of Fears, we do it for another brand as well, like to ship out for them, because a lot of fulfillment companies just, handling watches is difficult. It's really difficult. And that's why for us, it's like, we offer that service to other watch companies going like, well, hopefully Sam will agree with me. Fears does quite a good job of wrapping up a watch. But
the best watch packaging I've ever received, even down to the Fears branded wrapping paper. I actually made the review that's coming out soon. I think the latter part of it, people might have to indulge me because there's at least 2 or 3 minutes just on the packaging side of it. So, 10 out of 10.
I mean, the other thing as well is, how many times can you order from the best company in the world with the best product in the world, and they ship it super quickly, and then you see that email that tells you who the carrier is, and then you just go and run at a brick wall because you know if it says certain things, good, that'll get here in time and it'll be here tomorrow, and others you're like, yes, they've delivered it to the roof as the driver drove past, like a drive-by shooting and threw your parcel over the top of your house.
My team hate me because what we've now started doing is when we do complimentary worldwide insured shipping, express, we never charge for shipping. We now give people the choice. We're like, click, do you want it delivered by FedEx, DHL, UPS? Because fundamentally it's like, especially when you're talking about a luxury product, people forget this isn't a unit and an order number going out the door. This is someone's like, they've saved up to spend money with you as a company. And I think, when you're looking at right back, and let's bring this back around to Hodinkee, the first product they ever sold wasn't a watch. It was a collaborative pocket square with Drake's of London. Drake's make a lot of the ties I indulge myself in buying. And, but back then you pretty much could have guaranteed, if not then probably some of the team in between writing articles were packing it up and wrapping it up and putting it in the parcel and but when you're getting to a point where you've got an 80 grand a month rental that you're not using, when you've got 160 people on payroll, you stop having to think about, you can't indulge in thinking about it as like, oh, this person has spent the money. You just need the orders going out the door as quickly as possible. And the shame is if people experience that. Like, the clever thing is when luxury brands are able to operate at that vast quantity and that vast, number of shipments, and people don't get that feeling. But the fact that they were, that's not great. That's not great.
And that's why so many of the more established watch brands, all the ones we know, the big Swatch Group ones, the Richemont Group, the LVMH Group, that's why they were so reticent to touch the internet with a barge pole other than having a website. They didn't want to ship online because there is a fundamental disconnect between putting something in a box that makes sure the package gets to the other side in one piece and making it look pretty and all presentable. Because, I've, during COVID, like probably many folk listening to this, if you wanted a watch, it was coming to you in the mail. It was as simple as that. Yeah. And I remember speaking to one of the guys I know, Omega, and he's like, I know what you're like with your watches. They have to be meticulous. We've been told by Switzerland to unpack the watch, take all the stickers off, put it on its little cushion, put it in the box, put the box in the other box, and put it in a box and send it to you. But we guarantee you that the guy on the courier wagon isn't going to give a hoot what's in that box, and it will be kicked from one end of a warehouse to the other when it's on its way up to you. and that watch will be bouncing around in the box. So are you okay if we just leave it in its little plastic coffin that you don't know exists because these things don't exist? And it's like, please leave it in the plastic coffin. And literally it was like, it arrived, it was the most unluxurious experience ever, but at least I got my watch in one piece and it wasn't marked.
Yeah.
But then, you know,
Customs
that's a fundamental disconnect. You can't deliver the same in-person thing. Nicholas does a great job of getting as close to that as you possibly can, but that means that you need to design packaging specifically with shipping in mind, which most of the watch brands don't do. They have a, look at my big box that I can present to you with a glass of champagne in a boutique, and you know that doesn't go hand in hand typically with things going in boxes with carriers.
Yeah.
Very true.
Very true. Yeah, good point. Is it? I mean, we've gone over time a little bit. We didn't touch on the Watch Pro article. Maybe we could do that, unless you want to do 5 minutes on that, or how's everyone feeling? It's late for the guys in the UK.
I don't think the Watch Pro article now adds a lot that we haven't said.
Well, what
Actually, I will say it did one thing. Rob Corder is he's a journalist in broadly the truest sense of a journalist. He's worked in journalism all of his life, and he's like, facts are facts, story's a story, and he's not particularly emotional about it in any way, which is, I guess, for me, what I expect from journalism, people to be as impartial about it as they can. But he actually does at the end say, I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon of all the others who are broadly writing hit pieces on Hodinkee. Yes, they've got problems. Yes, the market's in a mess. Yes, lots of things aren't going their way, but he goes out his way to say, I don't want to be one of these people that's just doing it for the sake of hitting on them, which I think is pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah. Excellent point. Yeah, excellent point to finish on. Well, guys, thank you. A big thanks to the panel, and thank you everyone for being so active in the comments. I'm so sorry that I couldn't get through to all of the comments. There's some absolutely fantastic ones on there. So yeah, encourage people, if you're rewatching this, to make sure you put the comments on live if you're watching on your Apple TV, so you can read some of the great comments that came through. If you're new to the channel, I'd love it if you subscribed. I know there's a lot of new people here. We do a live stream every Sunday, and I do a couple of reviews a week as well. So big thanks to everyone. Thanks for the panel, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk. Thanks, everyone.
Take care,
Bye.
everyone.
Cheers. Thanks.